So thank you, everybody. Welcome, everybody, of course, on this, at least in the Netherlands, beautiful day. The sun is shining over here, and we're happy to present to you the 32nd Ifso Journal Club, in which we try to give young researchers and researchers in general a podium for interesting and important research that has recently been published. The selection criteria are that it has to be interesting, it has to be new, or any other thing that we can learn from it. And a panel of the Ifso communication committee then selects an article. And for this month, we have selected a very nice one. And I first want to introduce the at least two authors that are with us today. First of all, the presenter and the first author of the article is Guillermo Pons de Leon, working now in the ABC Medical Center in Mexico City. And with him today also is the last author of the article, of course, very well known Miguel Herrera, working also in the ABC Medical Center, but his mainstay is in the National Institute of Nutrition, also in Mexico City. So welcome both of you, and I'm very glad that you are here at this early age because it's 7 a.m. in Mexico right now. So glad that you woke up early today. And what I would like you to do in the upcoming, let's say, hour is to talk us through the article. You made a very nice video, Guillermo, that we're going to show. First of all, the title of the article that you published, Roux-en-Y gastric bypass in patients with severe obesity, primary response criteria, and their relationship with comorbidities remission. So just to start off, I think it would be nice to do a poll, right? So you made a couple of questions here, Guillermo. Do I have anything to add in the introduction for both of you? Guillermo first.
Oh, let's see the polling.
Okay, great. Miguel, any remarks prior? Because before we're gonna do the polls, I want to tell all the audience a couple of things, and the first one is that this session will be recorded. So if you want to show it to colleagues or friends, you can go to the YouTube channel of the Ifso tomorrow, and it will be there, or you go to the website of the Ifso Academy. And if you have any questions during this session, then please put those questions in the question box down below, and we will come back to that after the presentation itself. So we're gonna have a nice long discussion as well of at least, let's say, half an hour. So Guillermo, let's see which questions you made for the poll. So I'm going to read this out loud because this is one of the more important things that is discussed in the article as well. We're going to give you a minute to answer this question, and you just can click on the answer you want to give. So the question is, what is your target in terms of comorbidities in this population? And with this population, we mean patients with severe obesity, or in other words, a BMI over 50. The answers are at least 80% of improvement, partial or complete remission, at least 50% of complete remission, 75% of complete remission, or near to 100% of complete remission. So we're just gonna wait for everybody to fill this in, and we're gonna see the answers in a couple of moments. So I think our time is up, if I see that correctly. So if we can get the results. So I think that these are the results right now. They're in a different order than we assumed. but I think that is quite a clear answer here. At least 80% of improvement, partial or complete remission. Now, in the background, we're now going to the next poll, but that will come after the presentation, I think. So let's start just with the video, I assume. So if we could start the video that you made together with Miguel Guillermo, then we'll first go to that and do the polls afterwards.
Hello, everyone. This is Guillermo Ponsarion from Mexico. First, I really want to thank for the Ifso Journal Committee for this invitation. I'm so humble and honored for this. I'm going to present the following study, Xxxii gastric bypass in patients with severe obesity, primary response criteria, and their relationship with comorbidities remission. I want to make the following disclosure. We don't have any conflict of interest. The present study was not funded, and no author has a financial interest or affiliation to disclose. Also, I really want to highlight the following sentence. We are not suggesting RYGB as the gold standard for the treatment of patients with BMI above 50 kg per square meter. We all know that the incidence of obesity has been increasing in the last years. The incidence of obesity has increased 3 times in the last 3 decades. The group of patients that have shown the greatest increase of the incidence is a group of patients with severe obesity, defined as a BMI above 40 kilograms per square meter. And specifically, the group of patients that have shown the greatest increase of its incidence is a group of patients with BMI above 50 kilograms per square meter, showing an increase of 75% of its incidence in the last decade, representing nowadays 0.5% of the world population. As bariatric surgeons, we know that bariatric surgery is the most effective way to treat these patients to achieve significant and sustained weight loss. However, when we have compared the results or the outcomes for this specific group, patients with BMI above 50, when we made the comparison with patients with lower BMI, it looks or it seems that these patients get inferior outcomes, showing lower excess of weight loss and a greater frequency for weight regain. For example, in this series, the median of BMI of patients who underwent lap band remained above 40 after 2 years. And for the patients who underwent a sleeve gastrectomy, the median of BMI at 2 years remained above 35. And the patients with who underwent RYGB showed better outcomes, but they still remained with a median around 33 kilograms per square meter at 2 years. So probably we are looking that these are not expected outcomes that we are looking for. So when I was doing my fellowship, I had some questions. The first one was, is there any difference regarding the weight loss among the different procedures? And what I found is that the sleeve gastrectomy was related with lower excess of weight loss at 3 years. But the most important thing that I found is that patients who underwent the sleeve gastrectomy, up to 2/3 of the patients remained with a BMI above 35. And patients who underwent RYGB, look, almost 30% of the patients remained with a BMI above 35. But is this really important? Are we left in these patients with an indication for bariatric surgery? If this is the only thing that really matters, well, on the other hand, a recent systematic review found that there are as much as 190 weight loss parameters that have been described. In total, at least 13 definitions have been described to define success or primary response, whereas other 23 definitions have been used to define failure or non-primary response. The classic Reinhold criteria that consists in an excess of weight loss above 50% probably is the most used criterion to define success. However, many other authors have been suggesting that we should use, for example, the total weight loss, or as you can see here, Byron, for example, suggests that we should use a cutoff in the BMI. Byron suggests that for this specific population, patients with BMI above 50, it is enough that patients can reach a BMI lower than 40. However, we as surgeons almost used, all the times, we use this cutoff, that patients should reach a BMI lower than 35. The truth is that we don't have any consensus, and we are still looking for the ideal criteria. Probably the ideal criteria that could be defined as the greatest weight loss possible, in addition to complete remission of comorbidities, absence of weight regain, as well as the avoidance of medium and long-term malnutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, and early or late relapse of the metabolic comorbidities. But as you might be thinking at this moment, this is completely utopic, and this cannot be possible to define or to get. So we have the following questions. Is weight loss the only parameter that we should consider to define success? How much weight loss is enough to achieve significant metabolic effects in this specific population, patients with BMI above 50 kilograms per square meter? Therefore, the objectives of the present study were the following. The first one was trying to identify the rate of primary response according to different criteria. And the second one was trying to make a correlation and to assess the impact in comorbidity improvement or remission for each of the criteria. This is a retrospective cohort study that included patients who were operated between 2004 and 2019. The inclusion criteria were patients older than 18 years, patients with BMI above 50, and who underwent RYGB. Patients with previous history of bariatric surgery were excluded. We included a total of 104 patients. 56% of the patients were male, and regarding the comorbidities, 26% of the patients had type 2 diabetes, and 59% of the patients had hypertension, and 69% of the patients had hyperlipidemia before the surgery. Regarding the weight loss, we found that the greatest excess of weight loss and total weight loss was reached between 18 and 24 months. Weight nadir was reached at 1 year in 32% of the patients, at 18 months, 29% of the patients, and at 2 years in 19.2% of the patients. At the latest follow-up, 24 patients, 22%, showed a weight regain greater than 10%, and 15 patients, 14%, regained more than 20% of the weight loss. In terms of the primary response or success criteria, we found that up to 85% of the patients showed an excess of weight loss greater than 50% at 2 years, and 76% of the patients remained with this at 3 years. This was pretty similar for the patients who reached a BMI lower than 40. But when we analyze restricted criteria, such as this BMI lower than 35, we found that less than 2/3 of the patients reach a BMI lower than 35, and less than 50% of the patients persist with this at 3 years. Regarding the comorbidities, we found that more than 80% of the patients show improvement, partial or complete remission for each one at 3 years. Of this, complete remission was achieved in 55% of the patients with type 2 diabetes, 52% of the patients with hypertension, and almost 65% of the patients with hyperlipidemia. We therefore made the following analysis. We tried to make a correlation between the different criteria of success and the complete remission of each of the comorbidities, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and hyperlipidemia. What we found was the next. We found that for those patients who reach stricter criteria, a BMI lower than 35 and a BMI lower than 30 showed a slight trend to have more frequency of complete remission of type 2 diabetes. However, this was not significant. Regarding hypertension, this was pretty similar for each of the patients. But in terms of hyperlipidemia, we found significant differences. Those patients who had an excess of weight loss greater than 50% showed more than 70% of complete remission at 3 years, whereas only 20% of the patients who did not reach this cutoff, so an excess of weight loss lower than 50%, showed complete remission. This was completely significant, and this was in the same for those patients who had a total of weight loss greater than 25 and 30%. After that, we made the analysis in order to identify all the variables who were related to complete remission for each of the comorbidities: type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and hyperlipidemia. When we made the analysis for type 2 diabetes, we found that the insulin use, preoperative insulin use, was the only variable who was related to failure to complete remission of type 2 diabetes. The rest of the variables, including excess of weight loss, the BMI, the preoperative HbA1c, and many others, were not significantly related to complete remission or to failure of complete remission. For hypertension, what we found is that the baseline diastolic blood pressure was significantly lower in those patients who achieved complete remission compared for those who did not achieve complete remission of hypertension. Also, what we found, and this was completely significant, was the presence of weight regain at the last follow-up. Those patients who had complete remission had lower frequency of weight regain above 10% and obviously above 20%. See, 12% against 50% of the patient who did not reach complete remission had at least 10% of weight regain at the last follow-up. So those patients show greater frequency for relapse or failure of complete remission at the last follow-up. But also, what is really important here is regarding hyperlipidemia. What we found is that those patients who had complete remission of hyperlipidemia show greater excess of weight loss and a slight trend to a greater total weight loss at 2 years. Those patients who had complete remission had an excess of weight loss of 76% compared to 65%, who was totally significant. So once we had all the variables who were significantly related to complete remission or to failure of complete remission for each of the comorbidities, we made then different models of multivariate analysis. It is important to highlight that there were no significant model for type 2 diabetes. So we were not able to make any conclusion regarding type 2 diabetes and complete remission. In terms of hypertension, what we found is that weight regain was significantly related with a lower frequency or was related for failure of complete remission of hypertension. You can see here the odds ratio was 0.1. So that means that 90% lower risk to have or to achieve complete remission of hypertension in those patients who had weight regain greater than 10% at the last follow-up. For hyperlipidemia, what we found is that males had greater incidence or greater frequency for complete remission, an odds ratio of 7. That means that it's 700 more times for getting a complete remission. But look at this. This is totally significant, and this was totally amazing. Those patients who had an excess of weight loss greater than 50% had an odds ratio of 23 for to complete remission of hyperlipidemia. And the confidence interval, look, it is totally significant. So we can make the conclusion that excess of weight loss greater than 50% is complete related and significantly related to complete remission of hyperlipidemia. Obviously, our study had some limitations. This was a retrospective study. The sample size, once we made all the multivariate analysis and trying to make the sample size estimation, we found that there is a need of at least 100 patients with each of the comorbidities to get a proper multivariate analysis. Obviously, another of the limitations of this study is that we only included patients who underwent to just one procedure, RYGB, and we did not include patients with longer follow-up than 3 years, and obviously this study and our results needs for an external validation. For the conclusions, well, do we really need a specific criterion for this population? And the other question that I have is, what is the most important outcome? Weight loss or the metabolic effect? Probably is the metabolic effect. So we can conclude, based on our results, that an excess of weight loss greater than 50% may be the best criterion to define primary response or success in this population because of the following. It is related to acceptable rates of complete remission of type 2 diabetes and hypertension, more than 50% of complete remission of both, and it is related to significant higher rates for complete remission of hyperlipidemia. And also, more than 3/4 of the patient will reach this goal. So let's look if there is any question and see the final comments with Professor Miguel Herrera. Thank you very much again.
So that was a great presentation there, Guillermo. So thank you so much. I hope everybody can hear me still. Guillermo, Miguel, both can hear me? Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
So Guillermo, before we go any further, I think it would be nice to do the polls first that we had actually lying for doing before the presentation, and we'll take it up from there. Is that okay? So the first poll here was actually the poll that was supposed to be shown before the presentation. Which criteria do you usually use to define primary response success after bariatric surgery in patients with a BMI over 50 kilograms per square meter. So you have to select one of 5, BMI over 40, 35, excess weight loss over 50, excess weight loss over 70, or total weight loss over 20. And of course, you have been influenced now by Guillermo, but still I would like to know what you would pick right now.
Please avoid the bias after the presentation.
Yes, presentation bias is there. So yes. Whether that's a type 2 error, we'll see, but
I think there is a mistake. It's not BMI over 40 and 35. It's less than 40 and 35, obviously.
Yeah, but I think people have understood the question. Yeah. So of course they've been influenced, as has been shown here in the outcomes. You've at least convinced 60% of people to choose excess weight loss over 50%, and we'll come back to that during the discussion, I think, because there's a lot of discussion on this point. Let's show the second poll, or the third, if you would like. So the question is, which is your main target, let's say outcome, to define success after bariatric metabolic surgery for this specific population? And again, this is the severe obese population with a BMI over 50. So again, excess weight loss over 50%, a BMI, of course, under 35, excess weight loss over 75%, complete remission of comorbidities, despite the amount of weight loss, and excess weight loss over 50% plus 50% complete remission of comorbidities. So again, the outcomes here, not really surprising, but it's a combination. So although 50% of excess weight loss in your presentation was shown to be perhaps the most easy way of showing success, 50% of complete remission of comorbidities is again a fine outcome, if you would like to say it in that way. Okay, thank you so much. So let's start the discussion here. I think that the polls were pretty convincing. Do you think as well, Guillermo? Did you make your point?
Yeah, I think so. I really want to mention that I was surprised with the final results or the outcomes, because I was expecting that the more weight the patient loses, the more complete remission or the more metabolic effect. But I think that these patients loses a big amount of weight that really gives a big metabolic effect, and I think it is enough that these patients will lose an excess of weight loss over 50%, and it is enough. And we're giving these patients a big metabolic effect. That it's our main target. I think so.
Yeah, of course, it's not the obesity itself that makes people, let's say, sick, have more morbidity and more mortality. Of course, it's the comorbidity that comes with it. And in my opinion as well, the comorbidity reduction is the most important outcome. How do you think about that, Miguel?
No, I mean, I think exactly the same. I think the outcomes of bariatric surgery are switching from weight to resolution of comorbidities. And I think that is very important, although we still have weight as the main player for surgical indication and for reporting the outcomes. But I am happy to see that there is now an initiative where Ifso has an important role to redefine indications for surgery, measures of outcomes. And I think the comorbidity resolution is gonna get a higher rank in that.
I do think so as well. Of course, we have renamed, let's say, bariatric surgery metabolic surgery. That is sort of a statement as well. Of course, that's been going on for a number of years. But still, the big issue is that measuring the outcomes of comorbidities on average is much harder, of course, than measuring weight. It's pretty easy to put your patient on a weighing scale and then just look at what it says. I mean, if you want to compare large groups, isn't it much easier just to go for the weight, Guillermo?
Yeah, I think that we need a bigger sample to make some conclusions regarding the comorbidities, remission, and the impact of weight in this. So, if I get it, you were asking that if we need to see or looking for a bigger sample to make some conclusions regarding this, or
well, the question is more that of course we're surgeons, and luckily many more healthcare professionals are now included in the care of our patients. So endocrinologists, dietitians, physiotherapists, etc. So more and more data is coming. But there's still, of course, a big challenge if you want to register the outcomes, even for you after 3 years. I mean, that is the biggest challenge to look for outcomes. And it would be very nice to have all the outcomes for comorbidities. And if we have the same definition of what is what, but the biggest challenge is that many hospitals still only register properly the amount of weight loss, of course.
exactly.
So this remark is for the audience. Again, if you have any questions, do type them out in the chat box or the question box down below, and we'll pick those up and ask them to Guillermo and Miguel as well to make it a little bit more interactive. Otherwise, it will be a discussion just between the three of us, which is fine, of course, but a little bit of interaction with the crowd is always very nice to see. Now, Miguel, perhaps a question for you. Why do you think, actually, because the whole article is about the definition of, let's say, success. Can you elaborate a little bit more about why is that so important? Why is it important to define, let's say, success? Is that for research? Why is that?
Well, I think that's very important in several ways. First of all, for research. Second, if we want to compare several procedures, we need a common measuring of success. Otherwise, we will be lost. So I think that is important, and not only for the patients, but also to compare procedures, to see differences in the long-term follow-up, and to, when we sit and talk to the patient, to give real expectations of what's going to happen afterwards.
I think that's you actually nailed that answer, I think, because it's the patient that we actually have to show what the real outcomes are. I think that is so important. And why are we not succeeding as a community, a bariatric or a metabolic surgery community, in defining the right markers for success? Why is that so hard, Guillermo?
I think that most of the authors, they're looking, the main thing that I think is we are looking just in the weight loss. And we are trying to make some expectations regarding this. So if we can avoid only thinking about the weight loss, we will start working together and looking at we're given enough and significant weight loss for these patients. We're given a big metabolic effect, and we can work together to try to define this as surgeons. But we need to stay out, looking out just for one cutoff, and trying to make, as Professor Miguel was telling us, fake expectations for these patients. We need to give these patients the biggest effect in terms of weight loss and metabolic effect. That really matters.
Right, and I would like to add, if we would like to compare outcomes in between types of surgery or in between institutions, etc., it would be very nice, of course, to have those cutoffs the same, let's say. And It's unfortunate, for example, that you already showed, coming from a study from a prior colleague of mine, Daniela Bonavri, that you have the Reinhold criteria, the Byron, the Kristen criteria. You have all those criteria, but they are used, well, let's say in any sort of way which is convenient, I think. Well, the first question just came in from the audience, so round of applause there. Thank you so much. It's coming from Moab, and he thanks you for the presentation, first of all, Guillermo. And he says, I noticed that patients who achieved diabetes complete remission had higher levels of HbA1c than those with partial remission preoperatively. What is your explanation? So the question is that in your presentation, you showed that complete remission patients had higher levels of HbA1c than those with partial remission. Do you have any explanation?
The levels of HbA1c were not significantly different. There was a slight bigger levels of HbA1c in those patients who had complete remission, but this was not significantly related. How we define complete remission, HbA1c lower than 6 and no medication after 1 year. That is, I think it's totally defined because of the ADA and previously by Berthauer. Well, a possible explanation that we found for this is that these patients loses a big amount, so the weight loss is so big that these patients will have a big metabolic effect. The direct study that is based only in diets and medical therapy demonstrated previously that a weight loss above 50 kilograms that is sustained could reach complete remission. So I think this is the explanation that these patients, 100% of the patient loses more than 50 kilograms.
And so might it also be that they were using less medication? So because if you stop total medication, of course, you get a sort of rebound effect sometimes.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Okay.
The only thing that we found preoperatively that was related was the insulin use, that many authors have described that.
Right, right. Well, Moab has another question, and it is about definitions as well, because he asked you what were the terms of complete remission in terms of HbA1c levels, or what was your definition precisely for complete remission?
Less than 6%, less than 6% of HbA1c and no medication after 1 year.
Right. So that's clear. So that's the international criteria from the endocrinologists. Okay, great. So those are the strict ones. So thank you so much for that questions. If there's any more, then please let me know. Perhaps one other factor, because it's quite a special group. I mean, of the patients that we're doing surgery upon, I mean, the percentage of people with a BMI over 50 is percentage-wise relatively small, right? What additional challenges do you see in that patient group, within the patient group that we operate upon? That question is perhaps for you, Miguel. So what additional challenges do you see in that severe obesity group compared to the, let's say, other obesity groups that we treat with surgery?
Well, there are several challenges. I mean, first of all, as what we have been talking about weight, and the effort that those patients need to do is higher than patients with morbid obesity. Many times those patients are sicker. They have an obesity of for longer time, and that's more difficult to control. And also many times those patients are limited, functionally limited, and then it's hard for them to start an exercise program or to do something that may help the results. So I think that's a particularly difficult population. And we also need to say that surgically, those patients are also more difficult to treat. The operations take a little bit longer, complications may be higher. So that's a particular group. And there are hospitals where are reluctant to see patients with severe obesity, or that they only take care of patients after they lost a significant weight. So I think that's a population that we need to look carefully. And now that that I have the microphone, and perhaps for some people, one doubt is why are we selecting only one procedure now that we have other procedures that may give a better weight loss, a better comorbidity control. And this is something that when we start talking about the paper came to my mind. And the problem that we have in Mexico is that follow-up beyond the second or the third year is very, very poor. And we know that procedures with better results also have a significantly higher level of protein and micronutrient malnutrition. So we don't want to put those patients at risk of complications if we cannot follow them. So I think there is still a lot of room to select what is the best procedure for these patients and what is the target that we need, and then to balance pros and cons. And I think that's not a problem that only relates to Mexico. I think that is a problem that relates to all countries where patients need to pay either a little or a lot for medical care. So those patients are very difficult to follow up. And then to follow those, if we don't follow those patients, we are risking them to develop complications that may need treatment when they are very advanced.
I think that you made some excellent points there, Miguel. I mean, if you're reading an article, then sometimes you are wondering why the surgeon has chosen, for example, a specific procedure. And there are so many things that influence it. And the first thing that many times comes to mind is the surgeon must have chosen this because he either can't do other types of surgery. But it's more and more becoming clear that those local challenges make up for many of those choices. I mean, if you can't do a follow-up for longer, then if you want to do, let's say, a SADS or even more malabsorptive surgery, that can indeed become challenging. I mean, one of your colleagues has written a very nice thesis about iron deficiency in Mexico a couple of years ago, and it's a challenging problem, especially when you combine it with gastric bypass surgery in general. I don't know how well micronutrients or multivitamins are available there and how many people can afford them, but those are challenges that you come across in many countries. Even in the Netherlands, I'd say many people just don't take them because they think they are doing fine and they don't show up, etc. Follow-up is so important. And if you've seen and if you've shown us, Guillermo, you see that the follow-up decreases after a year or two, but especially the weight regain is there. Time is of the essence. And then with that, I mean, is there a specific time at which you would say, I want to define success? Is that after 1 year? Is that after 2 years? Is that after 3 years? Or should it be every year? Do you when do you define success, Guillermo?
Well, that is an excellent question because it's very difficult to answer it, because everybody knows that between the 18 and 24 months, patients will stop the weight loss. So the biggest amount of weight loss will reach between, as I showed here in the presentation, between 18 months and 24 months. But after that, patients will start to with some weight regain. I think a better definition for this could be between the second year and the third year, because at this moment, 24 months, probably those patients will show the effect of the metabolic or bariatric surgery. So we'll reach the nadir of weight loss. But we need to still looking for these patients to continue with the weight loss and, as you were asking me, avoidance of weight regain. So probably in that point between the 24 months and 36 months, we need to start looking at them and to trying to define success between this specific period. Yeah, the amount of patients who showed weight regain greater than 10% was near 23%, 22%, if I'm not wrong, and less than 15% of the patients will have a weight regain above 20%. Oh, the only thing that was related with significant weight regain was the preoperative weight. Obviously, these patients have bigger weight or than many others that we are operating. This specific population represents only 10 to 12% of bariatric population, but it still really matters. So I think that we need to stay at the follow-up and look in them more than 24 months.
And would it be a possibility to actually have patient just report the outcomes if they can't come in for a longer period of time? So after 5 years, after 7 years, after 10 years, would of course it's not as how do you say the data might not be as good as you would measure them yourself, but might that be a solution in this digital time? Let's say it's becoming more obvious and obvious that patients are able to send in the data themselves to you without coming in.
Yeah, I think so. I think that we can ask them for the weight loss, and we can ask them specifically. I think that it is easier to follow them if they are restarting some medication for hypertension, type 2 diabetes. I think that for hyperlipidemia, it's very difficult because many of those patients won't have a lipid profile, complete lipid profile. And a previous study that we made, we showed that after 3 years, most of the patients will return or will have at least one hyperlipidemia, LDL-C, cholesterol abnormals, total cholesterol. So I think it's very difficult to have a complete follow-up and a proper follow-up for hyperlipidemia. But we can register if patients restart medication for hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and we can ask them for the weight loss or the weight.
Excellent. So that might be part of the solution. Now, Miguel, of course, it's all about comorbidity reduction. And now you've operated on a patient, severe obesity, let's say starting BMI of 60, lost all his comorbidities, including type 2 diabetes and hypertension. And at year 3, he comes back at you and has, let's say, comorbidity regain. So the hypertension is back, the type 2 diabetes is back. What do you do?
Well, I think that we as surgeons, we always think in first place, what other operation we can do. And I'm not sure that that is a good way of thinking. I remember my times during residency, long times ago, that there was a big debate in the oncology field. And that all the discussion was if resecting 1 meter more or less was important or retrieving 1 or 2 lymph nodes. And now the operations are very, very standard. And neoadjuvant therapy, adjuvant chemotherapy, and other ways prove that were significantly better or that help a lot to control the disease in addition to surgery. So I think it's time to start thinking if we need to develop more procedures, so we need to go with more advanced procedures in order to control the disease, or we need to look for other ways of treatment. I think you made a very good point about follow-up. We are always talking about the importance of good follow-up, but we do very little trying to improve follow-up. And now with the pandemic, we learned that there are several ways of doing this with the digital media. And I think that's something that we need to improve, because in the patient that you are mentioning, it may be at least part of the problem that the patient lost follow-up. So that, if we believe that that's important, we need to improve it. But now we have the patient. So the correct answer at the beginning is to send the patient for multidisciplinary treatment. And I'm not sure that that helps many times, because those patients fail to multidisciplinary treatment before surgery. And now that they have regain of weight and comorbidities, they may also fail to multidisciplinary treatment. So we need to talk to them, to talk to the patients, and see if we can use one of the operations that we have to increase restriction or to increase malabsorption in order to help that patient. And that's depending what was the first operation that we did.
And keeping in mind that it might not be a good idea to do more malabsorptive surgery, do you see in the future perhaps, let's say, room for liraglutide or something that comes close, so GLP-1 analogs, additional treatment, or something else? Is that an option if it's affordable, let's say?
I think that's important, and you made a very good point in the end that the problem is the price of those products that is very high in some countries. But I think now our internal medicine doctors and endocrinologists are very open to treat those patients medically and see if they can help them. The data that I have seen of medical treatment after weight regain is very little and is not very convincing. But I think that there's at least a safer way to treat those patients, and that we need to explore more if the combination of medications with surgery, either since the beginning or when the patients start regaining weight, it's useful.
Right. So Guillermo, it's probably quite hot in Mexico right now because you took off your jacket, I saw. But if you would not have to deal with, let's say, follow-up or whatever, if you have a patient with severe obesity, let's say severe, what would in your eyes be the most ideal type of surgery right now? If you don't have to think about let's say affordability, follow-up, etc., what would your first thoughts be? Is that the gastric bypass? Is that, for example, sleeve surgery? Is that aiming for two-step procedures? Is that OAGB? What is, in your opinion, the best way to go?
I think it depends on the general condition of the patient. If the patient have a poorer general conditions, probably a two-step procedure is a good option. Making a sleeve gastrectomy and then going for the final procedure. Could be an RYGB with a long BP limb, or it could be a single anastomosis to longitudinal. I think it depends from each country. As Professor Miguel Herrera was saying here.
No, that's what I said. So don't think about location, etc. Just pure what would be the most ideal. So now you have everything in your grasp. You can have that patient coming in every year, so no restrictions there.
If not GERD, probably single anastomosis to longitudinal. I'm not liking that CES because I think it's very hyperabsorptive procedure, and we were looking for many patients with malnutrition. But BP limb of 2 meters, I think it could be a good option. And if there's no GERD, I think it would be a good option. If patient has GERD, RYGB with a long BP limb, 1.5 meters and 1 meter of limitary limb.
Okay, excellent. This is just to make a point. This is actually this discussion about what would be most ideal and what is most ideal in the circumstances that are working. Yes. So yep. Keep in mind when you read something, read everything. So where does it come from? What were the reasons to do things? And I think that as authors of articles, we have to also tell our audience or our readers why we made certain decisions. So it was a great article, but especially with you now explaining the why, let's say, is so important to actually implement this in your own clinic, for example. Now, Guillermo and Miguel, first of all, once again, many congrats on this study, but of course, we have to look into the future. What is upcoming? Is there something upcoming for this specific patient group? Because it's interesting. I mean, you've shown that this group is the fastest growing within the obesity patient group. So we have to come up with, well, perhaps not only surgical answers, but as surgeons, we have to think about the options. Is there research on the way, or do you have any thoughts about what you want to research in the near future?
Well, the research that I have seen is to use different procedures that produce higher weight loss and control of comorbidities. There is also a line of research using drugs. There are several drugs coming up, and they are trying to combine drugs with surgery for this patient population. And then finally, to reinforce the multidisciplinary treatment in terms of more frequent visits or more intense participation of other professionals trying to improve the results.
Any addition to that, Guillermo?
No, that we shouldn't be so aggressive. The weight loss is not the only thing that really matters. The metabolic effect really matters, I think, even more than the weight loss. And we shouldn't be looking for something that is so aggressive for these patients and not changing one disease for another, not changing obesity and comorbidities to malnutrition and many others. So we need to see the whole patient, the whole conditions, and making less is better sometimes.
I think this has been a very, very nice discussion, and I want to thank both of you for first the very nice study that you presented. But I was very glad that I was able to pick your brains, let's say, a little bit, to see what ideas you have for the future, what the actual reason was to do the research, and of course telling our audience that it's pretty difficult to treat this patient group. It's not as easy as we think. It's not just a one-trick pony. It's not a one-stop shop. I mean, we have to look at patients individually. Although studies officially always go about groups, and of course that's the easiest way to go, but keep looking at your patients as one individual that needs your care, and you have to make the best decisions as healthcare professionals to treat that patient. And that is even more important in this patient group. So once again, this whole session has been recorded, and tomorrow it will be available on the Ifso YouTube channel and on the website of the Ifso Academy. Any last famous words? Guillermo, you first.
I really want to thanks again for the Ifso Journal Committee, and to you and Professor Miguel Herrera for this invitation. I really like it, and let's see, it's for the next following events.
And before I give Miguel the last famous words, I want to compliment you, Miguel, for giving Guillermo the chance to do this presentation, because it's very important for young colleagues to actually show their face. And of course, you can do that once you're already well known in this community, but it is well appreciated. So Miguel, your last famous words.
I mean, I think that was very important. He's already started, and he needs to start being visible in several meetings. And I would like again to thank Ifso for picking up our work and for being interested in our work, and for the opportunity of participating in this webinar, and to you for an extraordinary coordination. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and a special thanks, of course, to the Ifso and Stephanie and Manuela for putting this together once again. See you soon, and although the times are challenging, I hope to meet you in person again once Corona has, well, become a little less challenging, let's say, and we'll speak to each other soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, guys.